She counted them all. Every broken edict, every sealed order set aside for coin, every sentence handed down in the king's name that the king himself had never read. She wrote them in a ledger small enough to slide beneath a loose hearthstone, in script so fine it looked, to the untrained eye, like inventory. She was, after all, only the record keeper. The girl in the archive hall who smelled of cold ink and old vellum, who no one spoke to except to hand her a title deed or a land covenant to copy fair. She had no wolf, or so they believed. She had no standing, no bloodline worth citing, no mate claim over any man in the northern reach. What she had was a ledger, and the king did not know she was counting. She would count to 104. Then the world would crack open, and the name they had erased 20 years before would be written in the same hall where it had been struck from every record. She did not know yet how close she was. She only knew that the entry she had just made was number 47, and that the man on the throne above the court was looking, for the first time, toward the archive hall with something other than indifference in his eyes. The year was 419 in the reckoning of the northern reach, and winter had come early to Valdenmere. Ice had sealed the outer gates by the first moon of the cold season, and the great keep sat above the frozen gorge like a bruise on pale stone, its torches burning orange through the mist long after dark. The pack had endured 6 years of the warden's court by then, 6 years of Lord Davon's edicts folded inside the king's authority like a blade inside a scabbard, and most had stopped expecting the law to mean anything at all. Maren had not stopped. She was 24 years old and had been copying records in the Valdenmere archive since she was 14, first under old Essa's supervision, and then, as Essa's sight had dimmed, at Essa's side as something closer to equal, though neither of them would name it that aloud. The archive hall sat behind the council chamber on the keep's second level, accessible by a narrow stair that guards rarely bothered with. It smelled of tallow and stone dust and the particular dry cold of rooms that held more paper than fire. Maren kept her own small brazier. She wore fingerless mitts to preserve her grip on the quill through the morning hours when the stone wicked heat from the air entirely. She was good at her work, precise and fast, and Lord Devon's stewards had come to rely on her speed with the copy press during the twice-yearly tithe declarations, without ever registering her as anything beyond the instrument she appeared to be. That was the thing about instruments. People handed them everything and watched them for nothing. Essa knew what Maren was doing. She had known since the third entry, had pressed her thin lips together and set one hand on the closed ledger and said simply that if it were ever found, neither of them would survive to see it used. Maren had said she knew. Essa had lifted her hand from the ledger and gone back to her shelf work without another word, which was, for Essa, a form of blessing. The first time Calder, Alpha King of the Northern Reach, entered the archive hall unannounced, Maren was alone. It was a gray morning in the 9th week of winter, and she had spent the prior hour copying a grain covenant for the border holds when she heard the stair. Not the guard's tread, not Essa's shuffle. A heavier step, unhurried, accustomed to rooms yielding. She did not look up. She pressed her thumb over the corner of the ledger, covering the entry she had just completed, and went on writing. She heard him stop near the door. She heard the quality of the silence change around her, and she did not look up even then. "Which register is current?" he said. Not a question. His voice carried the flat command of a man who had stopped inflecting requests toward their recipients years before. "The Reach Holdings record," Maren said. "It is not finished." "I did not ask if it was finished." She did not stand. She turned the holdings register toward him across the work table and kept her own left hand flat on the corner of the ledger beneath it. He came forward and studied the holdings record for long enough that she was able to breathe. His presence in a room was not like other men's presences. It was not merely height or the width across the shoulders. It was the way air organized itself around him, the way even the archive's customary stillness sharpened, the way the single candle she had burning seemed to hold rather than gutter. She read it as threat then, and believed she was right. He took the holdings record. He said nothing further. He left. She opened the ledger and wrote, Entry 48. She had first entered the count 3 years before, in the winter of year 416, when she had been present in the copy press gallery above the warden's court, and watched Lord Devon sentence Bram the miller's brother to a season of bonded labor for failure to tithe on land, the Reach Compact explicitly exempted from the autumn levy. She had the compact text 3 feet from her hand. The exemption was on the second folio, Article 4. She had copied that article herself. Devon had used the king's seal, pressed in full view of the assembled court, and the man had been taken in chains before anyone spoke, because speaking in the warden's court without station was an offense that carried its own penalty. Marin had gone back to the archive hall and opened a new ledger to a fresh page. She wrote the date, the article number, the name of the man taken, the nature of the exemption violated. She wrote it clean and cold, the way facts must be written to survive their authors. Then she slid the ledger under the hearthstone and went back to her copying. The thing about counting was that it required patience rather than courage, and Marin had more patience than she had ever been given credit for. She had learned it at her mother's knee, or what remained of the knowledge her mother had carried before the lawkeeper's household had been struck from the Reach Register 20 years before, when Marin was 4 years old. She did not remember the burning of the hall. She remembered, barely, the weight of her mother's hands covering her eyes. She had grown up afterward as a ward of the archivists, nameless in the relevant registers, raised on the work of copying other people's claims until she knew the law of the Reach well enough to find its seams, its exemptions, its forgotten provisions that had once protected those who were no longer protected. She had found herself inside those provisions, unnamed and therefore unprotected but still present, still watching, still counting. 48 entries. In the year 416 alone, she had counted 9. She did not make the mistake of trusting that. If you still have breath and a quill and the patience to wait, you write. Essa had told her that, not in reference to the ledger, but to life in the archive, which was the same thing. You write until someone opens the vault, she had said, and then you let the law speak. Calder appeared in the archive 3 more times before the warden's moon of year 417, and each time he said less. The first time he came for a title deed. The second time he came for a sealed covenant with the southern border, holds that Marin had been asked to copy, and whose original he seemed to want verified. She found the original, set it beside the copy without meeting his eyes, and watched him study both in silence for a long time, his dark head bent, the crown circlet he wore casting a faint iron shadow across the work table. The third time he came, he did not ask for anything. He stood in the doorway for the space of 1 minute and then turned and left, and Marin sat very still for a long time after and told herself that a king might stand in any doorway he chose. The recognition was not in the doorway. It was earlier, small and unbidden. The kind of thing the mind refuses to hold and the body does not forget. It had happened in the court below, during a public sentencing in the 4th week of that winter, when Devon had called the name of a woman from the Cold March holds, who had petitioned the court for relief from a bonded contract signed under duress. Marin was in the gallery above with her copy press, as she always was. Devon was midway through his dismissal of the petition when Calder, from his seat on the high dais, spoke a single word. Stop. The room went very still. Devon stopped. Calder looked at the petition document in his own hand for a long moment. Then he said, The contract predates the current compelled agreement statute. The woman stands relieved of the bond by the statute's retroactive provision. Devon's face did not change. The room did not breathe. The woman from Coldmarch stood at the far end of the court floor with her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone colorless. Marin looked down at her copy press and wrote, Entry 51. Then she crossed it out. She picked up her quill and wrote below it, in the careful notation she used for corrections. Entry 51. First partial stay. Retroactive relief granted. Cold March hold. King's own voice. File. She filed it. It was not a violation. It was the opposite. It was the single entry in 3 years that was not a mark against the law but toward it, and it unsettled her in ways she could not name because she had built her counting on a fixed assumption, and fixed assumptions, Essa had told her, were the enemy of accuracy. She was still thinking about it when she looked up from the gallery railing and found Calder looking directly at her from the dais below. Not at the gallery in general. At her, specifically, steadily, in the way a man looks when he has located the source of a sound he was not expecting. She looked away first. She pressed her thumb on the entry. She told herself she had imagined the directness of it. She believed this for approximately 3 weeks, until he appeared in the archive again and stood near the hearthstone. He did not look down. She was almost certain he did not look down. But she watched his hand rest on the edge of the hearthstone's frame as he passed it, one finger tracing the grout line, and her whole body went so still it hurt. He asked for the border covenant again. She gave it to him. He left. She sat for a long time without moving, and then checked the hearthstone and found it undisturbed. The ledger was exactly where she had left it. Entry 52, she wrote that night. She sat with the quill over the page for a long time before she wrote anything further. Then she wrote it plainly. He stood at the hearthstone for 11 seconds. He did not look down. He does not know. She did not understand yet why she needed to record that particular fact. She wrote it anyway, because accuracy required recording not only what was done, but what was nearly done, and what nearly happened sometimes mattered more than what did. If you still have breath and a quill, you write. The count reached 80 by the early weeks of year 418, and by then Devon had noticed that entries in the archive's record copies were sometimes out of order, sometimes a word or two cleaner than his steward's originals, and once a citation that had been altered in the sealing document to allow a greater levy had been restored in the archive copy to the correct amount. He had not yet named the source, but Marin saw him looking at the archive stair twice in the same month, and she told Essa, who said simply, "Move the ledger tonight." She moved it to the vault. The vault was the old lawkeeper's chamber at the back of the archive hall, behind the shelving and the copy press, behind a door that had been sealed for 20 years with a lock that no one in the keep remembered the origin of. The lock was silver set. It required a blood mark, pressed directly to the silver plate, and silver burned any hand that did not carry the old lawkeeper's lineage in its veins. Marin had discovered this when she was 17 and had set her hand on the plate out of curiosity, and the silver had not burned her. It had warmed. She had stood for a long time with her hand against the plate, feeling the warmth climb her wrist, and then she had gone to find Essa. Essa had sat her down and told her the history she had kept back until then. The lawkeeper's household, the burning, the small girl whose eyes had been covered, the ward taken into the archive without a name written in any register. Marin had not spoken for a long time. Then she had asked if the vault had anything inside it. "It does," Essa had said. "But it will keep until you have something worth putting beside it." That had been 7 years before. The vault was ready now. She pressed her hand to the silver plate, felt the warmth bloom up to her elbow, and the door opened. She placed the ledger on the shelf beside the bundled records her mother had left there 20 years before. The original lawkeeper's copies, the lineage documents, the old register that still bore the entries she had been unable to find in any other book. Lawkeeper's household, established by the first compact, sealed by the first king's mark, standing perpetual. cannot be struck except by the First Compact's own provision, which required the lawkeeper's own written consent. Her mother had not consented. The consent was forged. Entry 1, she thought, 20 years before she had started counting. Devon found out in the second week of the Warden's moon. He did not find the ledger. He found the corrected archive copy that Marin had amended 6 months prior, and he found the hand that had written the correction, because there was no other hand in Valdenmere that wrote the Reach Compact citations with that particular economy of phrasing. He brought the charge before the Warden's Council on a morning when Calder was in the outer holds reviewing the winter fortifications, far enough away that the courier would need 2 days. The charge was sedition against the Reach, willful alteration of sealed records, and conduct unbefitting a bonded ward of the archive. The penalty was 3 days hence, at the next sitting of the Warden's Council. They came for Marin on the stair. She did not fight. She had the presence of mind, in the moment before Devon's men reached the archive hall, to step to the vault, press her palm to the plate, and pull the door shut. The warmth sealed the lock behind her hand. What was inside was hers, and could not be opened by anyone else in the living world, and no one in the hall except Essa knew the vault existed. Essa stood at the copy press when they led Marin out, her hands folded, her eyes tracking Marin's face. Marin gave her one small nod. Essa gave nothing back, which meant she understood and would hold. They confined Marin to the archive hall itself, which was either oversight or contempt. She was permitted her cot and her brazier and 1 candle at a time. She was not permitted her copy press, her quill, or any register. They believed they had taken the instrument. They did not know the instrument had been writing long before she had picked up a quill, and that the vault behind the shelving contained 20 years of lawkeeper's records, plus 3 years of Marin's own. She spent the first evening in the cold of the hall without restocking her brazier, because there was no tinder permitted, and she sat on the cot with her cloak around her shoulders and ran through every entry she had committed to memory from the ledger, not for comfort, but for accuracy, making certain nothing had been lost between the hearthstone and the vault. 48 violations in the first year, 12 in the second winter, when Devon had grown more careful, 19 in the third year, when he had grown confident. The numbers did not change. They did not need her to hold them. They were already written, and the vault was sealed, and no hand but hers could open it. She was still there when the night candle went out. Calder came back on the second day. She heard him on the stair before she heard anything else, the distinctive unhurried weight of it, and she stood. She did not know what she expected. She had spent the prior day in a cold assessment of her situation that had arrived, repeatedly, at the same conclusion. She was going to have to name herself, not to save herself. She had made her peace with what happened to her. But Essa was 62 years old and had been removed from the hall, and if the count ended with the ledger sealed inside a vault only a deadline's daughter could open, then it had counted for nothing. The law had to be read aloud in the room where it had been broken. That was the only form justice took that could not be forged or burned. She heard the guard speak to him in the corridor. She heard Calder's voice, one short sentence, and the guard's silence after. Then the door opened. He stood in the frame for a moment. She had spent 2 days in the growing cold of the archive hall without her brazier being restoked, and she was wearing her cloak over her work clothes, and she knew she looked small and still, which she was. Small and still was the posture she had learned long before she had learned to count. He came in. He did not speak right away. He looked at the shelves, at the stripped work table, at her cot and its single blanket, at the cold brazier. Then he looked at her. Devon says you altered sealed records. Yes, she said. Something shifted in his jaw. A small tightening. That is a serious charge under the Reach Compact. Under the Reach Compact, Article 31, she said. It is. Under Article 32, An archivist who corrects a record falsified by the sealing party is not in violation. The standard requires that the archivist hold evidence of falsification. I hold that evidence. She paused. I have been holding it for 3 years. He was very still. Whatever expression was underneath the controlled surface of his face, he was not letting it reach his eyes yet. Where is the evidence? He said. In the vault, she said, behind the shelving. The silver-locked door. He looked at the back wall. He had stood near the hearthstone 14 times over the course of 2 years and had never looked at the vault door directly. It was not obvious from the main body of the hall, set back as it was behind the copy press. He looked at it now for a long moment, and then he looked back at her. Who else knows it is there? He said. Ik essa. No one else living. The stillness in him was a different quality now, not the composed flatness of a man accustomed to managing a room. Something more careful than that. More interior. Open it, he said. She could have said no. The thought crossed her mind with perfect calm, because she had been in possession of her own choices so rarely that she recognized the texture of one when it arrived. She could say no, and he could compel her, and they would both know what the compulsion meant. Or she could choose, and let the choosing be the thing. She walked to the vault door, pressed her palm to the silver plate, and felt the warmth answer her. The door opened. He was behind her, close enough that she felt the air move when he stopped. She heard his breath catch once. She did not turn to look at him. The bundle on the top shelf is my mother's records, she said. The ledger below it is mine. 104 entries. The first page of my mother's records is the original lawkeeper's compact standing, with the first king's seal. The last page of my mother's records is the forged consent to dissolution. Both are in this vault. Both are lawkeeper's property under Article 11 of the First Compact, which has never been repealed. She paused. No one has ever tried to repeal it, I believe because no one remembered it existed. He reached past her and took the ledger from the shelf. He did not open it yet. He held it for a moment with both hands, the way a man holds a thing that has been waiting longer than he knew. 104, he said. 104 violations in 7 years, she said, all but 9 under Lord Devon's orders, all bearing your seal, none bearing your voice. Silence. I found 9 that bore your voice, she said. I counted those separately. Entry 51 through 59, all corrections, all toward the law, not against it. She kept her own voice flat and careful, the way she had learned to keep it in the archive, where emotion was a kind of noise that obscured the record. I kept accurate count. He opened the ledger then. She watched him read without turning fully toward him, watching the side of his face in the vault's pale light. The line of his jaw, the old scar that ran from temple to cheekbone on the left side. She watched him stop at the 9th correction entry and read it a second time. She watched his hand tighten on the edge of the page, not crumpling it, just holding. Wren appeared in the archive door a few minutes later, and Calder said, without looking up from the ledger, "Bring Devon to the warden's court. Tell him the morning session is moved to now. Tell him the king will be presiding." A pause. "Tell him the archivist will also be present." Wren's eyes moved to Marin. Something in them was not surprise. "And find Essa," Calder said. "She belongs in the hall for this. If you still have breath and a quill, you write. If the vault opens, you let the law speak." The warden's court in the gray morning of the 4th day held 63 witnesses, 38 members of the warden's council, in their gray robes and station chains. 8 foreign hold representatives who had been in Valdenmere for the winter negotiations and had the misfortune of being present for the wrong kind of history. The Lady Tive and her household, who had come to the court that morning with the confidence of people who know which way a season turns and believed they knew the direction of this one. 12 guards. Essa, seated at the side of the hall nearest the door, her hands folded in her lap with the precise stillness of a woman who had spent 40 years waiting for a specific morning and was determined not to move a muscle until it arrived. And Devon, standing at the council table with a posture so certain it read as carved. "She altered sealed records," he said, before anyone had formally addressed him. He said it to the room, which was the kind of thing a man does when he believes the room belongs to him. "The evidence is clear. The charge is clear. I ask only that the council render its verdict without further delay." Calder laid the ledger on the council table. The sound it made was not loud. It was the sound of a book set down by a man who is not performing patience. The council table was long enough that the ledger landed in the space between Devon and the assembled wardens, equidistant, a thing to be reckoned with by both sides. 104 violations of the Reach Compact, Calder said, documented by entry, dated, article cited, named, and sealed. His voice carried the flat declarative he used in the archive, but colder now, carrying through the stone hall without effort. "In 7 years, 14 of them are falsifications of my own seal. I did not sign those orders. I have the originals." Devon's expression held for 2 more seconds. Then it did not. "The archivist fabricated every word. The vault was sealed by my order. She has no standing to speak before this council." "The vault," Calder said, "that holds the documentation, open to a lawkeeper's blood mark. No other mark will open it. The woman who opened it is the surviving daughter of the lawkeeper's household that was struck from the Reach Register in year 399. A pause. "The dissolution was forged. The required consent was not given. The household standing is perpetual under Article 11 of the First Compact, which has never been repealed." Another pause, a weight settling into the room. "She has been serving in this archive for 10 years as a nameless ward. She has been documenting violations for 3. She has been protecting the archive's accuracy against falsification, which is the lawkeeper's function. She was performing her legal duty. You brought a charge against the last lawful record keeper in the Reach for doing the only work that has kept this court from being entirely corrupt." The 63 witnesses in that hall produced, collectively, no sound at all. Wren read the ledger aloud. All 104 entries, each with its date and its article citation, and the name of the person harmed. It took 41 minutes. The 8 foreign hold representatives who had believed they were present for routine winter negotiations stood still and listened to 41 minutes of the Northern Reaches administration read back to them from a ledger the size of a prayer book. The Lady Tive, halfway through, sat down on the bench behind her. She did not look certain of the season's direction anymore. Devon's advocate tried to speak twice. The second time, Calder said his name, once, and the advocate sat. When Wren finished the last entry, he closed the ledger and set it on the table. The hall held its silence for a full breath, then another. Then Calder stepped around the table and came to stand before Marin, and every warden in the room watched him and said nothing. He went down on one knee on the stone floor. It was not ceremony. It was not for the room, though the room received it. He looked at her with the controlled surface gone entirely, the face beneath it unguarded and serious and carrying something the 63 witnesses would not be able to describe later except by its effect, which was that the most powerful man in the Northern Reach was on his knee, and the woman before him was standing. "I did not know she was keeping score," he said. His voice was low, but the hall was quiet enough that it carried. "I should have. She was the only one left who could." Marin did not speak. She kept her hands still and her chin level, and she let the room hold what it was seeing, because she had been patient for 3 years and for 20 before that, and the record did not require her voice to be true. She held his gaze, and she did not look away. Devon broke in the way that men break when the architecture they built their confidence on is removed from beneath them, all at once, and badly. He made accusations that contradicted his prior statements, which the wardens present were not in a position to ignore, given that they had just heard 104 entries read aloud. He named 3 council members as co-signatories on the falsified orders. 2 of those 3 confirmed it before he had finished naming the third, which was either conscience or the superior arithmetic of men who understand that the ledger is now open and it is better to be witness than subject. The third tried the door. Wren was at the door. Devan was removed from the warden's council before the court dismissed, on the king's motion, supported by 31 of the 38 wardens present. The other 7 were placed under inquiry. The Essa was reinstated to the archive hall that afternoon by the king's personal order written in the king's own hand, with the lawkeeper's household standing formally restored in the Reach Register, and the archive hall renamed the Lawkeeper's Hall by provision of the First Compact, Article 11, which had never been repealed and had now been formally cited in public record for the first time in 60 years. The council held 3 more sessions before the winter ended. Marin attended all of them, in her chair beside the copy press in the gallery, with her quill and her fresh ledger, still small and still in the way she had been trained to be, still watching. She had started a new count. This one was different in shape from the first, because the first had been violations, and this one was corrections, and there were more of them now, and they came faster, and they bore the right names. Calder appeared in the archive hall on the 5th morning after the warden's court, with no stated purpose. He did not ask for a document. He stood near the work table, and she was at the copy press, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. "You wrote 9 corrections into the count," he said. "You kept them separate." "Accuracy requires it," she said. "Most people in your position would not have bothered." She set her quill down and looked at him directly. "Most people in my position were not trained to read the Reach Compact from the beginning." A pause. Then, quietly, "From the beginning. Article 1, she said. "The law does not belong to the person who enforces it. It belongs to the Reach. The lawkeeper holds it in trust for the Reach." She paused. "That is what I was doing, holding it in trust, while you enforced it." He looked at her for a long moment, the old scar on his face catching the morning light from the high window, the iron circlet casting its shadow across his brow. He had a face that did not give itself up easily, that held its reading behind stillness and years of controlled surfaces, and she had been looking at it from across courts and corridors and gallery railings for 3 years, without allowing herself to look at it as anything other than a political fact. She allowed it now, one careful moment, and found it complicated in the way things are complicated when they have not been looked at directly for too long. "I want to know how many I missed," he said. "How many violations? How many times something was done wrong under my name while I believed my name was being used correctly?" She was quiet. "That count is not finished." "I know," he said. "I am asking if you will keep it." The warmth that moved through her was not the vault's silver warmth, which was ancient and bloodline deep and asked nothing of her. This was closer to the surface, briefer, the kind of warmth that the body offers and the mind immediately begins to explain away. She did not explain it away. She looked at him across the work table and she said, "Yes." She heard him breathe. Just once, quiet, the kind of breath a man takes when something he did not know he was waiting for arrives. "Then I should give you my schedule," he said. "Yes," she said. "You should." Calder reached across the work table and set his hand down beside hers. Not on it. Simply beside it. Close enough that she could feel the heat from his skin. His hand was large and marked across the knuckles with an old silver burn from a severance trial he had survived 7 years before the laws he'd inherited had begun their slow corruption. She had not known about the silver burn until that moment. She looked at it, and then she looked at the faint scars on her own hands from the vault plate's warmth, and something in her registered, without needing to name it, that they had both been tested by the same metal for different reasons, and both had come through. He did not move his hand. She did not move hers. Essa came up the stair a few minutes later, set a fresh bundle of records on the shelf without comment, lit the second brazier, and left again with the expression of a woman who has been waiting 40 years for a specific morning and knows, when it finally arrives, to give it the room it needs. The new ledger on Maren's work table was open to its first page. At the top, she had written, in the careful script she used for titles, Northern Reach Compact Corrections, Year 4, 19 forward. Beneath it, the first entry, the Warden's Court sitting, the names restored to the Reach Register, the article cited, the witnesses recorded. 63 of them. 38 wardens, 8 foreign hold representatives. 1 lady sitting on a bench, 12 guards, 1 second who had been at the door, and 1 old archivist who had kept her hands folded and her stillness absolute for 40 years. Maren wrote the last line of the entry, set her quill in its stand, and looked at it. Entry 1, she thought, and it was not sorrow and not triumph, but something she had not had a word for yet. The weight of an accurate record in a house that had learned to be afraid of accuracy, settling into the shelf where it belonged. His hand was still beside hers on the table. She turned her palm up and let it rest there, open, and he did not move for a breath. 2. And then his hand closed over hers, careful and complete. The silver burn against her silver burn, the old test of both their lines, finally, quietly, answered. The ledger was on the shelf. The law was in the hall where it belonged. Outside the high archive windows, the winter light was very pale and very cold and entirely itself, asking nothing of anyone, indifferent to kingdoms and records and the particular gravity between 2 people standing at a work table in a room that smelled of tallow and stone and the beginning of an accurate count. She had started it. It was hers. It was enough.